April 15, 1912. The North Atlantic Ocean was dark. The air was freezing. And the largest ship in the world was dying. For more than 2 hours after striking an iceberg, Titanic had fought to stay afloat. But now, only 15 minutes remained. More than 1,500 people were still trapped aboard. Some prayed. Some searched desperately for loved ones. Some refused to believe the end had come. And in just moments, the most famous ship in history would disappear beneath the Atlantic forever. This is the story of Titanic's final 15 minutes. The clock shows 2:05 a.m. The tilt of the ship had become impossible to ignore. Passengers struggled to stand. Deck chairs slid across the wooden decks. Loose objects crashed through hallways. The bow had sunk deeply into the ocean, while the stern rose higher with every passing minute. Lifeboats were nearly gone. Most of the people still aboard now understood a terrible truth. There would not be enough room for them. The freezing Atlantic stretched endlessly around the ship. No rescue ship could be seen. No lights. No hope. Only darkness. And the growing sound of rushing water. Panic begins to spread. For hours, Titanic had remained surprisingly calm. But now fear was taking control. Families became separated in the confusion. Passengers ran across the sloping deck searching for empty lifeboats that no longer existed. Crew members shouted orders that were barely heard above the noise. The angle of the ship grew steeper. Walking became climbing. Standing became impossible. Some people began jumping into the freezing ocean. Others clung desperately to railings. Nobody knew exactly how much time remained. But everyone could feel it. The end was close. The band plays on. Near the boat deck, Titanic's musicians continued performing. For hours they had played music to calm frightened passengers. Now, surrounded by chaos, they remained at their posts. Nobody ordered them to stay. Nobody forced them. Yet they continued playing as the ship died beneath their feet. Survivors later remembered hearing music drifting through the cold night air. The exact final song remains debated. But what is certain is this. The music continued almost until the very end. Not one of the band members survived. The ship's heart breaks. By approximately 2:15 a.m., Titanic was nearing its limit. Millions of pounds of water filled the forward sections. The immense stress on the ship's structure became unbearable. Deep inside the vessel, metal groaned. Rivets strained. Steel plates twisted under pressure. Passengers heard terrifying sounds. Some described them as explosions. Others compared them to thunder. In reality, Titanic itself was beginning to tear apart. The ship had been designed to survive many dangers. But not this. Never this. The final minutes. Now the bow was almost completely underwater. The stern lifted dramatically into the air. People slid helplessly toward the freezing sea. Anything not secured began moving. Furniture. Equipment. Pieces of the ship itself. The ocean rushed across the decks. Hundreds gathered near the stern, the highest point remaining above water. It became a desperate race for survival. Many climbed higher and higher. Every foot gained meant a few more seconds of life. The cold wind cut through clothing like knives. The temperature of the water was around 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Below freezing. Only the salt kept it liquid. Anyone entering that water faced almost certain death. 2:18 a.m. Then it happened. After enduring unimaginable pressure, Titanic finally broke apart. The massive ship split into two sections. The sound echoed across the ocean. Survivors in lifeboats later described hearing a horrifying roar in the darkness. The bow section immediately began its final plunge. Pulled downward by thousands of tons of water, people were thrown into the sea. Others desperately held on. The stern briefly settled back toward the surface. For a moment, some believed it might float. But that hope vanished almost instantly. The last 2 minutes. The stern began rising again. Higher. And higher. Until it pointed dramatically toward the stars. The giant propellers became fully visible above the ocean. Passengers clung to rails, to cables, to anything they could hold. Some prayed aloud. Some screamed. Some stood silently, frozen by shock. The lights aboard Titanic flickered, then returned, then flickered again. The electrical systems were failing. One final battle against the inevitable. Then, darkness. Complete darkness. The lights went out forever. 2:20 a.m. Titanic disappeared. The stern slipped beneath the Atlantic. The unsinkable ship was gone. Only minutes earlier, it had been a floating city. Now nothing remained above the surface. The ocean closed over the wreck, and silence filled the night. But only for a moment. Then came the cries. Hundreds of voices echoed across the freezing water, calling for help, calling for loved ones, calling into the darkness. The sound haunted survivors for the rest of their lives. The aftermath? Most of those in the water would not survive long. The extreme cold rapidly overwhelmed the human body. Within minutes, many lost consciousness. Within a short time, the cries gradually faded, one by one, until the ocean became quiet again. Lifeboat survivors listened helplessly, unable to rescue everyone, unable to forget what they were hearing. It was one of the most heartbreaking moments in maritime history. Conclusion. In just 15 minutes, the greatest ship of its age vanished forever. More than 1,500 lives were lost. Families disappeared. Dreams ended. History changed. The tragedy exposed critical failures in maritime safety and led to reforms that still protect passengers today. More than a century later, Titanic remains far more than a shipwreck. It is a reminder of human ambition, human courage, and the fragile line between confidence and catastrophe. On that freezing April night in 1912, the ocean claimed Titanic. But the story never sank. And it never will. END. If you enjoyed this historical documentary, subscribe for more true stories from history's most unforgettable moments.